Hello, I'm Jasper Smith, Executive Editor for Commentary at Tax Notes. I'm here with Bailey Hands, the winner of the 2021 Tax Analyst Christopher E. Bergen Award for Excellence in Writing. Bailey's paper, titled GoFundMe, The Gift That Keeps on Giving All Tax Season Long, examines the tax consequences of donations made through crowdfunding platforms. It also explores ways to provide certainty to donors and donees in the absence of administrative or congressional tax guidance. Bailey received her JD from Notre Dame Law School in May and is pursuing an LLM in taxation at New York University. Bailey has graciously agreed to join us from her home in New York to answer some questions about her experience with the competition. Welcome, Bailey.
Hi, thank you so much, Jasper, for having me today.
Yes, again, thank you for taking the time to come on. We know you are busy pursuing that LLM. So first off, can you give us a brief overview of your paper, please?
Definitely. So my paper starts with the story of Sergeant Charles Gaytan. He and his family are the recipients of the largest single family donation in GoFundMe history. I just started my paper off with their story. I thought it was a really interesting example of how GoFundMe works and how the tax consequences can really help a family in need. So his wife was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then they were told they would never be able to have children, and then she was naturally pregnant with quadruplets. So they made the GoFundMe page basically just to help out with this entire situation, and they received around $1.1 million. So when someone receives that much money, you would just think automatically, I mean, I would think like, oh, that's obviously taxable income. It's just so much money. But when you're receiving it on the GoFundMe platform, it is technically categorized as a gift and received tax-free. So I just am sort of interested in finding out or thinking about if that's an ideal kind of result, if we would like that to be how our tax system functions. So I just use this paper to explore that situation and then some complications with GoFundMe platforms. So, for example, any sort of money that an employer gives to an employee should technically be taxable income to that employee. But the GoFundMe platform complicates those sort of situations. So because you're able to donate anonymously, an employer could technically donate to an employee and get away from that rule. So I just kind of explored those situations and using a tax policy analysis and then kind of a tax procedure. So I came in with tax policy analysis, look at the problem, and then kind of came up with some possible solutions, more of like a tax procedure viewpoint, kind of what could we do to fix this if it was an undesirable result, and is it even worth fixing? So I kind of came up with the conclusion that it's really not worth implementing any of the solutions that I proposed. I kind of talked about setting a threshold limit to make this a little bit more difficult for people to donate large donations, but then I looked at the data and people aren't really donating on GoFundMe large amounts. So it's really not worth the time and effort that it would take to implement a solution like that. I believe the average donation on GoFundMe is around $25. So it really is kind of a site, and not just GoFundMe, but all crowdfunding platforms. GoFundMe is just the largest. That's why I keep using GoFundMe as the example. But they're just kind of, I came to the conclusion, people helping people, and that is a desirable result. And our tax system shouldn't really do anything to kind of get in the way of that, was my ultimate conclusion.
Now, and I'll tell you, it was fascinating because you started with that story of this really, for lack of a better term, outrageous sum of money that you think about when it comes to these crowdfunding platforms. And then you really led us through a nice analysis. But the whole time as I was reading, I was thinking, I don't know if any of this will work though. I'm fascinated, I'm riveted, but I don't know if it'll work. And then you ended and said, but we don't need to do it. So I said, okay, Bailey got me. She got me all the way through. So what led you to select that topic?
So at Notre Dame, we're assigned an elective our 1L year. And I think I had chosen legislation and regulation. We rank them. And I was put into estate and gift taxation and was relatively disappointed. And then I got to the class and I absolutely fell in love with tax in general, but estate and gift tax. I didn't really understand all of the ramifications that really went into gifting. So I kind of kept it with me, my curiosity about gifting on a smaller level. I could kind of understand the large examples that we were given in class, the problems, so and so is given, whatever over the unified credit exemption amount. But I kind of just thought, like, what about everybody, like everyday gifting? How does that kind of fall through the cracks? So then my 2L year, I was in my tax policy class and given the opportunity to write a longer paper. And I didn't really know what I wanted to write about. So I went to talk to my professor, Professor Michael Kirsch, um, and just said, I'm kind of interested in looking at donations on a smaller level. And he said, like, how are you thinking about this? And like, really the only experience I have with donating is on GoFundMe. And he said, well, why don't you explore kind of how that works? So it was a great inspiration that I needed to look more into that specific area of smaller gifting.
Wow. Well, that was a long process that led you to that, but we're glad you got the opportunity to explore it rather and did a fantastic job at it. So once you wrote the paper, what led you to submit it to our student writing competition?
So I wrote it with Professor Kirsch during that seminar. And then I was working at Notre Dame's low income taxpayer clinic. And I had briefly told the director, Patrick Thomas, about the paper, and he asked to read it. And he was also really interested in this, but more so kind of asking me how I could really bolster my solutions to the problem. I think whenever I submitted it to the tax policy class, the solution section was maybe a page and a half or so. But then I worked with Patrick Thomas on developing and kind of thinking about the solutions, how they could, be implemented and why they wouldn't work. I knew they wouldn't work when I was, discussing them, but I needed more help flushing them out. So he really helped me getting a more polished paper. And then I had worked on this for 2 semesters at this point, and I thought, maybe I'll just submit it to a writing competition. So I Googled tax writing competitions and found you guys, and I thought, why not?
Well, I'm glad you did. And it because it took 2 semesters, we don't want you to get into too much detail, but we're certainly interested, if you wanna tell us a little more about the actual drafting process. How did you go about your organization and your research? Anything you want to share there?
Well, a lot of it was discarded after the first class. And I kind of worked on just thinking about what was really necessary to keep in the paper, which was very difficult for me because once I write something, I really don't want to put it in, on the other Word document that I have or discarded things just in case I ever want to pull them back and use them. So I have a lot that was out, which was a unique thing for me. So that helped a lot, kind of learning that everything I write doesn't need to stay in the paper.
Yeah, I'm glad you're learning that. That probably is one of the hardest thing for even the most experienced writers to realize that it can't all stay because after you spend so much time with it, it really does become a part of you, if you will, and when you're writing something like that. So that's just a good lesson to learn. And you talked a little bit about some of the assistance that your professors gave you. Do you want to go more into detail on that? Did they help you to come to the conclusion, or was it really just kind of guiding you along in your research?
I think Professor Thomas really helped me struggle with why my solutions wouldn't be ultimately successful. He's more experienced in, dealing with the day to day of how the IRS actually works. And I would propose a solution, and, he would help me think about, like, well, how would that actually work in practice? And I think my limited experience from working at the clinic, I could kind of see sometimes what he was saying, but other times it would take a little bit longer. And I mentioned in the beginning that I took kind of like at first an overview, like a tax policy look at the paper, and then the solutions were more procedural. So I think Professor Kirsch helped me a lot with the tax policy and understanding kind of a broad overview of the problem.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's really good use of the resources that you had because again, I mean, this is something that even experienced writers struggle with. You may know certain elements of an issue. You may be able to do the research and understand it, but you always need some type of help to kind of maybe give you a viewpoint that you hadn't or a perspective that you hadn't thought about, or maybe help to guide you towards an answer that might seem more practical. So I think another valuable lesson, Bailey. Thank you for sharing that. What other advice would you have for entrants that are submitting papers for next year?
I think I was a little hesitant to submit a paper, and I felt more comfortable because I had spent so much time on it. But I think really the only advice I really would say is, you have nothing to lose by submitting. Really, like, just go for it. And if, your paper isn't chosen, it's not, necessarily a commentary on you, but, maybe the other papers that were submitted, everybody, the applicant pool changes from year to year. So just submit and see what happens, because I wasn't expecting at all for it to be chosen.
Yeah, that's a really nice glass half full, maybe three quarters of the way full approach to it. And I know our competition and a lot of other competitions are blindly judged. So if you are selected, we may not even actually know who you are. What are your plans after you're finishing or after you finish your LLM program next year?
I'm thinking about maybe working in a law firm or an accounting firm for, a few years, a while. I'd love to return sometime in my career to a low income taxpayer clinic. I really, really cherished my time at Notre Dame's clinic, and I'd love to ultimately do some sort of work like that.
Excellent. And as I told you before we started recording, we certainly wish you the best on those goals, and then we'd love for you to return to the pages of tax notes at some point in the future with either of those career goals. So Bailey, thanks so much again for joining us. We really enjoyed this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it as well.
And you can read Bailey's full piece online, as always, at taxnotes.com.
Want more like this? Subscribe for more tax videos. Special thanks to our executive producers, Jasper Smith and Paige Jones, and showrunner and video editor, Jordan Parrish.